my name is Vince Sheehan, and today I'd like to talk about Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto in E minor. I'd like to explore each of the three movements of this great work, really understanding how each of the themes are stitched together in order to make this glorious whole. I'm one of these people who just loves understanding how classical music works. It keeps me engaged while I listen to it, and if you're anything like that, please like this video and indeed subscribe. Now, the genesis of this concerto is really in a friendship. Ferdinand David was a great violinist and knew Mendelssohn from childhood. And when Mendelssohn became the principal conductor of the Leipzig Gewandhaus Orchestra, he had no hesitation in calling his old friend to be the concert master or leader of the orchestra. And about 1838, Mendelssohn had an idea for a violin concerto, which seemed to really bug him. This idea. And there began this long correspondence between Mendelssohn and David about technical considerations about this work. And it took a while for it to be finished. It wasn't until 1844 that Mendelssohn finished it. And it was premiered in 1845 in Leipzig. Mendelssohn was ill, he couldn't conduct it, but Niels Gade, the Danish composer, stood at the podium, whilst David, of course, played the solo part. The concerto was well received at its premiere, and it goes without saying that it's become one of the very greatest concertos of any instrument, certainly violin concertos, and of course this is performed countless times every year and recorded countless times every year. It truly is a warhorse. But if you really get to grips with its structure, you notice that there are some innovations in this concerto. So we'll begin with the first movement, the Allegro molto appassionato. We're in E minor, a bar or so of figuration before we have the first subject. Now this in itself is interesting because the first movement is usually in sonata form, and this is in sonata form, undoubtedly, but normally you'd get an orchestral exposition. You think of the Beethoven Violin Concerto, for instance. But Mendelssohn decides to go straight in with the solo violin. It's such a wonderfully original way to begin a concerto. So after some cadenza-like passages, we have a tutti statement of that stirring melody before we reach a transition melody, which goes like this. That kind of thing. Before we finally get to G major. So in E minor, now in G major. The relative major of E minor. And the violin simply here has a long G, open G string. And over the top we have the lovely melody on the winds. Then the violin comes in. beautiful music. And then we get a Codetta, which is quite lengthy, based on the first subject in G major. Before we get to a great climax. The development uses a lot of that transition theme. Do you remember that? That kind of thing. And we hear snatches of the first subject. Before we get to the cadenza. And the cadenza is remarkable because it's fully written out by Mendelssohn and in a sense is its own development section. Then eventually the violin breaks down into this. And now we're back into the recapitulation. Etc. Such a stroke of genius to go back to the recapitulation like this. Almost behind enemy lines, as it were. We have the transition idea. So on, before eventually we reach the second subject. And remember, before we had this long G string, this time it's an E, because we're in a tonic major. And we hear and then we go to the Codetta, slightly altered this time, but still with the dramatic statements of the main idea. Before we get into the Coda, which starts off based on the transition. Before it gets even faster. Thus ends the magnificent first movement. So a notable feature of the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto is the use of linking music between the movements. A real innovation. So between the first movement and the second movement, there's this modulatory passage with the strings, which goes like this. So we're going from E minor to C major, that's where we're heading for the andante. So we have this linking music. Then we come to the glorious main tune of this beautiful movement in ternary form. This is the A section. Really beautiful music. The music then goes through C major, then to A minor, the relative minor. That kind of thing. A dramatic, perhaps something a bit operatic about this movement. We have a return to the opening beautiful melody before we have a short coda. So again, like the first to the second movement, there's some linking music from the second movement to the finale. And we have this rather moving interlude. The solo violin kind of leads the other strings almost in like a folky refrain. I can imagine a bunch of people around a fire and in the middle of a forest somewhere as someone begins telling a story to the people around him. And then everyone joins in. Back to the soloist. And then we come to E major and for the finale, Allegro molto vivace. And it's a sonata form movement. We have a brief introduction here. We have this kind of fanfare idea. And then we have the first subject. Etc. Really exciting kind of scherzando music, kind of jokey, full of high spirits. And then we have a transition where we have this kind of folky figurations. That kind of thing. Before we get to the second subject, which again is quite kind of fanfare-like. We then have a Codetta based on that rhythmic idea from the second subject, while the violin plays furious passage work. The development is largely based on the first subject, and we start in G actually. Something like that anyway. And then we get a new idea. Mendelssohn does this sometimes in his developments. You might think of, I think it's the first movement in the Italian symphony. He introduces a new tune in the development. And this one kind of acts as a counter subject to the first subject. Goes like this. More melodies in this marvellous finale. And when the recapitulation happens, when we're back to the first subject, that counter subject endures. It stays around, which is lovely. When we have the second subject in the home key, E major, we have a Codetta, which brings back those bits from the intro. And we then have a rousing coda. So that's Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto in E minor. Thank you for watching this video. Please click like and subscribe. If you can afford to, please consider donating to help support my channel. And if you've got any pieces you'd like me to look at, operas, overtures, concertos, symphonies, please put them in the comments below, and one day I will get through all of them. All the best, take it easy. Happy listening. Bye.